You're listening to Dirty Feet, a podcast from No More Radio.
Vous écoutez le podcast Dirty Feet sur les ondes de No More Radio.
Hosted by,
animé par
Allison Burns,
JD Papillon,
et Stéphanie Morin-Robert.
Stay tuned.
We're going to move you.
Good morning and welcome to the Dirty Feet podcast. My name is Tim Rodrigues. I'm joined by JD Papillon. Today we welcome Emily Honegger of Floor Rider and Tonik alongside David Albert-Toth of Parts and Labor Danse, who will be remounting both of their works separately from the previous season this year at Tangente from September 18th through to the 21st. Welcome. So we'll get right into it. JD, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. How are you doing, Tim?
I'm doing very well.
And how are our guests?
Excited.
Into it.
Nice. That's good. That's good feeling right there. So basically, one of the important things to mention, I think, is that these are not new works. These are works that were presented as part of Tangente's regular season last year, and you were asked to bring those back for many different reasons, mainly because they were extremely popular and they actually had to turn people away at the door. But at the same time, for you as artists, the fact that you're asked to bring back something at the same venue, because of those questions of popularity, of appreciation by the audience. But not only that, but you get to also rethink about those pieces. How does that feel? Like just this opportunity to present it in the same space, but with this insight, basically.
Well, for our piece, The Density of a Moment, it's a really beautiful opportunity for me poetically. The piece is about time and what kind of gems remain in your hand when time filters down, what memory stays. The piece was created with our background of having trained really hard in certain styles with a very codified language, and then stopping training for a few years and just seeing what stayed true to us. So for me, poetically, it's a beautiful exercise to present this piece in November 2013 and then visit it again almost a year later and just see what's still there, what remains true. We're not changing the structure very much just because of financial considerations. We've just allowed ourselves enough time to get back into it physically. But it's a beautiful experience so far, the rehearsal process. Yeah.
For us, I have to echo in a sense what Emily's saying, and I think it's a fantastic opportunity that Tangente offered us. For us, going back into the same space, sometimes you worry about bringing a same work back into a same space, and is it oversaturating? But for us, we were really thankful for this opportunity because an element of our work was also tailor-made to this space. We premiered it there. Everything from the lighting design to the set design all incorporated the elements of that space. So while it's an exciting prospect to tour works in the future, it's also nice to reprise them in the space where they premiered because you feel at home. And like you said, it's an opportunity to go back into the work and see what worked the first time around and what can be improved upon. And oftentimes it's not a huge overhaul that's necessary on the work, but it's just identifying several key elements and having the time to go back into there and look at them again, open the discussion up with your collaborators and refocus those elements to just strengthen the whole.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but in both your cases, this was the first piece that you presented as a longer piece. I mean, Parts and Labor, you've presented shorter pieces before. You've presented your solo, which you just presented again recently, or you'll be presenting again shortly?
Both. We presented it in July at the St. John Contemporary Dance Festival and at the Flex evening as part of Diversité, and then we'll be doing more performances in September with Quartier Danse.
So basically, but as longer pieces, though, you've presented the excerpts also before of in Mixed Company or during the work in progress. But what did your first experience of presenting those pieces at Tangente teach you about your craft, about bringing those first quote-unquote works to an audience? Did you feel that the feedback you got, that the interaction you got with fellow artists helped you mature in your process? Did you feel it bring anything new to your own creative process, basically?
For sure. Emily Gualtieri, who is the other co-artistic director of Parts and Labor Danse, had already created several works of that length. And so I think she's at a point in her artistic parcours where that was not such a new element. But for us in our partnership, it was a new set of negotiations between two choreographers. So that was a really interesting time then. And so now I think it's interesting to dive back and continue that process.
On our side, we've already created a long work. We created a piece called Le Lancer du Nain that was an hour long. That was actually our first attempt at creating together, Geneviève and I. We made a full-length piece. But looking back at it, it was like a series of vignettes, really. It was a bunch of maybe 15-minute pieces put together. So this is the Density of a Moment. Our latest piece is a 30-minute piece. And I think it's the first time that we've created like an artistic universe or something that feels like it's one thing. Yeah, something that is like, ça se tient. Yeah.
I think that's the nice challenge when we're making the pieces of these lengths in this kind of professional setting, where you have to balance the variety that carries you through, so that it's not monotone the whole way through, but still is not homogeneous, but it cohesive enough to hold itself as a full work, which presents a new set of challenges from like you said, like 15-minute pieces. You're dealing with longer arcs. Mm-hmm. How do you negotiate that?
Mm-hmm. Speaking to that a little bit, tied in with the codified language of breakdance and contemporary dance and other urban styles that David is also versed in, the idea of those dances usually only happen in flashes, right? Like there's the cipher, there's getting down to whatever track hits you at the moment. So what were the challenges in pulling out of these codified languages longer arcs, longer narratives? Just because they do always live in a flash sort of setting. Did you find it harder, or with the experience that you have of the little 15-minute vignette pieces or the shorter works, was it easier now and to pull those longer bits out of the language?
I think that phenomenon is very pertinent in how we create our work. Often, like you say, like if you're in a b-boy cipher, like you're just gonna bust something out and it'll last 30 seconds and it'll be super intense, and then you're done for a few minutes. And I think Geneviève and I have always been attracted to working in groups for that reason. So you allow one person to speak their voice, and the rest of the group kind of hangs back a little, and you can rotate and take turns kind of sharing the torch, so to speak. So I think that has always been part of why we decided to work with a group of dancers. We're working with 6 dancers for this one. And that probably also influenced our choreographic voice, which is about bringing out stories within a group. So in a group of 6 dancers, what's going on with each individual? Mm-hmm. What is their individual experience, and how can that be expressed? How is that one dynamic expressed, 1 at a time, or 2 at a time, or 3 at a time? Yeah.
Nice.
There's a term you hear a lot, excuse me, in I think all the urban dance circles, from b-boying to popping and locking and house it, and that's power. You hear that term a lot, power moves, or just the power of the movement. And I think that's a very it's an obvious underlying element to that style, or to those styles. And I think what's been happening a lot also in recent years, just in that milieu, not related to contemporary dance, is more and more research into the subtlety of the movement. So even when you're in ciphers, even when you go to the club, you see dancers really working to integrate more and more subtlety, or at least I feel that that's what I'm seeing. where the power is still there, but it's now also just within those forms also being met with a greater subtlety, greater nuance, more complex senses of timing and playing with the music. And I think that's a progression that's happening on its own, and then also in its integration in contemporary dance, where we're not putting just strict b-boying next to, ballet dancers on point. But the integration is also becoming more and more subtle and nuanced, and the vocabulary also as a result. For us, or for me, in my movement research, I think one of the things that I focus on in terms of integrating that energy into the movement is the idea of pacing. That you don't have to go in with that movement and start at 100% necessarily. That kind of movement can lend itself to deconstruction, and you can pace how it's being brought in. So there are several tableaus where some of that kind of movement begins to be introduced and then eventually grows and grows and grows. And then in other sections, when the movement is really the through line all the way. It also becomes interesting to play with suspensions and timing and integrating maybe a more open body into that kind of movement, and then closing it back up, and working with different elements. And I think that it's important to underline that that's not only happening when you put that kind of movement on stage, but it's also happening in the heart of itself, which I think is an interesting place for it to be at.
Yeah, both companies and all four choreographers have worked with, in some respect, Helen Simard and Victor Quijada, who are two dance artists who are really pushing this idea of contemporalization of urban languages on the dance floor. And I'm just interested in hearing just a little bit about how those experiences when you guys were a little bit younger and a little more fresh out of school, how that really shaped maybe how you saw yourselves going further into the milieu.
I think, I don't want to speak for all of us, but I can speak for myself. I think Victor and Helen were very influential in those years when it wasn't as popular. It was still new and weird. And they really, I think, pushed through and stuck to their visions, stuck to their own stories too, their own personal stories and their own personal interests, despite what was out there. And I think they did really pave the way for a lot of us younger cats who were also kind of caught between these two worlds to not copy them, but to do as they did, which is figure out for ourselves where do we sit between these schools of thought, and that it's okay to be like this kind of mutt. This a bit of a dance mutt, and whether you incorporate other elements too, not just b-boying and contemporary dance, but for it to be okay to be a mutt and to listen to yourself and to research that. And I think that when you look at those two in particular, a lot of the research, the time that they've put into their own research, the movement research and artistic research and their own voices, is really quite something. There's been a huge investment on both of their parts, and I think that in and of itself is really inspiring to younger choreographers. And I would just echo also that Ismaël of Destin Croisé also, who's integrating it in a different way than someone like Victor or someone like Helen, has also been really, really working and working with a lot of us younger choreographers also and younger dancers from both milieux. So he also definitely is crafting as well, his own voice.
Nice.
I think David said that really well. I totally agree. I think I'd actually have a really hard time putting into words how much Victor, Helen, Jody Allen, many people, Emmanuel Lefant, have influenced me, shown me what's possible, given me physical tools and encouragement, and just provided a platform to express and play with. Yeah,
it's really an impressive family, actually, when you look at it, because all those people, they're constantly moving around the same circle, or the circles are constantly touching. It's interesting to see as an observer the real school that is coming out of that of that movement of like-minded individuals who happen to be in Montreal at the same time and into the same things. It's really quite impressive to watch, and to see you guys be the next step in that progression is actually quite refreshing.
What I think is also really cool, just to add to that, is that it's not only the choreographers who are making those kinds of efforts, but it's also the dancers who now, 10 years later, have worked with all of them. And the guy who comes to mind right away is in Emily and Genevieve's piece, Joe Danny Aurélien, who's been a part of all of the people that we've named so far and has contributed in a large part, I think, to a lot of that research that's been happening. And he's one, there are of course others, but I think that's also an important element to underline, that it's not just in the conceptual thinking of how can I bring these. You need people also who are able to handle those things and to take that on and contribute to that process. Yeah. And I think in both our teams now, we're also working with people who are able to take our visions and these kind of fragmented at times, and help us make sense of them in a really collaborative way. And I think that's super important. Yeah.
And I was just going to speak to the cross-pollination. I think that has happened with all of our dancers. I think we've all had at some point similar teachers or trained in similar circles. And there's a cross-pollination of physical language and energy there that creates a through line and a thread. Yeah.
That's one of the interesting things I feel with that evolution, basically, of academic thinking, where you see breakdancers coming into schools and teaching, and not just part of, outside of the regular the classroom, but just when I was at Concordia, we had Jody Allen for part of a semester. At UQAM, they get Beagle Links, who's teaching there sometimes. It's becoming much more respected as part of the traditional academic curriculum than it used to be, and you can see how much this influences dancers' movements, even in the pieces they now create, even if they didn't have a direct influence from Victor, from Helen Simard, from even you guys at some extent. But it's becoming more and more part of their language, of something that they want to use to express themselves, even without that prior thought. So, I mean, for you guys as choreographers who come from this wave, who use that kind of language, how do you feel seeing that now in schools, which back in your day, I guess, was a bit less present?
Yeah, I think if there's one word that you hear a lot, if you've been either a dance student or working professionally for more than a month, you'll get a note to be grounded at some point. I think if there's a really defining element to what's happening now, both in the movement and in, I think, the pacing of a work, it's to be grounded. It's that you need to be grounded, and that things don't tend to work when you're not. And I remember when I started Concordia, I felt really frustrated in the technique class because I didn't know how to use a tall, long body and how to open it and find amplitude, but I knew how to be grounded from my previous training, and that's where I excelled, were in those classes which were more about creative process, about movement research, and I could see other dancers also trying to work with the floor and trying to be grounded and not having maybe such an easy time, or seeing the way I was in technique class, I was seeing them in these other classes. And I think that what's important now is that I feel that there's the ignorance has left in contemporary dance, and I don't mean that in a bad way, just in the neutral sense of the term, is that we're starting to see more and more a recognition of the fact that there's a whole developed technique that exists and has existed for 20 years, 30 years, that uses the floor, which is all about using the floor and being grounded and finding ways to use momentum and generate momentum in complex positions, and how to keep things going in a very interesting way, in a very intricate way, and in a very thought out way, a very pedagogical way. And that's existed for a long time, and it's kind of only now in the last few years piercing through into the academic world and being seen as something that's more than just something that you should learn to quote unquote be versatile or be more showy or have more power. It's a legitimate tool. So I think it's fantastic that people who are coming in who who have had these careers and have this wealth of knowledge, people like Jody, people like Kate, who are coming in and really sharing that knowledge and basics and being able to grow with students. It's also allowing students to see where some of these techniques come from, right? Like when you see them on stage, again, coming back to our works, as artists, you want to take those techniques, you want to elaborate on them. You don't want to necessarily just show the exercise. You want to use them to say something. But for people who are still, young people who are still coming in, it lets them see at the root of it where this comes from, and I think that's important. It's important to know that history, but also just it's important to know where it comes from in the same way that you want to learn how to point your foot, or do a tendu and use the right muscles for it and not use the wrong muscles for it. It's as simple as that.
You mentioned a bit earlier how this kind of training, this kind of background influenced not only the movement chosen as part of your pieces, but also the pacing. And how much do you feel of the mentality of the history of hip hop actually influences you, actually gave a direction to your creative process, and not just for movement, but also for a mentality of what you want to present, of issues, of themes, all of that?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is what I just spoke about earlier, about the idea of carrying a torch in a cipher, how at a certain point in a group, there's a hot spot. Someone's got a hot spot, and they're channeling something. And how is that energy moving, and who's carrying the torch at what point? I think that's really present for me, and that's fueled some of the questions that I've had, which brought a more philosophical edge to this piece, about questions about time and perception. How we experience time and rhythms when we are in our center, when we are the center.
For me, I'd have to say actually that it's not directly related to the pacing of the work or of the conceptual nature of it. It's still within the idea of being grounded in something, and I think the movement speaks to that. But in the conceptual nature, I'd say I've come from a bit of a different direction than what you were saying, Emily, whereas I was influenced by literature and philosophy that was, for me, separate. And for me and for Emily Gualtieri, the bulk of the work was to then bring these our conceptual research and our physical research, which itself is part mine, but also part hers. So we try not to give too much of an emphasis in the urban influence into the movement. That it's a meeting, but they've met already a few years ago, these two approaches, and so now we're trying to elaborate on what that meeting is in and of itself. But to take the physical research and the conceptual research and to draw those two in together, so one not necessarily coming from the other, but individually, and then how do we reconcile those things?
I was about to ask about the reconciliation, because it is very much a dual language that Parts and Labor has, based upon the different experiences and training that the two of you had. And correct me if I'm wrong, but what I see a lot of the time is that technically it's driven from one side, and emotionally it's driven from the two of you connecting. I feel like the emotional drive and through line and narrative of the characters in your works, I feel is a real team effort. And then when I see the technique, I can see the two sides. Okay, yeah. It is being reconciled more and more each time as things go on, because you guys are still growing as a duo and all of that. But I feel like the reconciliation is coming and becoming more clear. Is that ever... Let me rephrase that. The idea of having one choreographer that's a little bit more versed in one language over the others... do you ever see that being... Do you ever see one element overshadowing the other? We just spent about 20 minutes talking about the urban element of your work, when really, if you were to put them side by side with Floor Rider and Tonik, you definitely see more of the codification of b-boy culture in their work,
Yes.
whereas with yours, the trained b-boy eye would see it, but most other people will just see tricks. So do you ever, is there a fear of being written off? I don't want to be negative or drive it down, but is that actually a real fear for either of you guys, either of the companies, actually, to be written off as a trend? Because we can sit and really go into how much the culture means to us and how much it drives our work and how much we respect and everything, but at the same time, you don't want to just be a byline as, oh, this urban contemporary dance company.
I think the way we deal with that is, it was about a year and a half ago or so that we said that we weren't going to make that a main focus of our mandate and of our profile. That it's part of my baggage as a dancer, the same way that maybe another contemporary dancer might have a classical baggage. Well, Emily Gualtieri, for example, has a classical baggage, and as any dancer will tell you, your baggage will follow you. You know, you'll learn to let it grow and develop and maybe dissipate a bit, but it's there somewhere. And for us, I think that's how we deal with that. It's part of my baggage. It's a excuse me. It eventually becomes an element of the work because of the movement research that takes place, but it's not at the forefront, and we don't make a point to necessarily publicize it. What we're more interested is, like you say, the relationship between people, and on developing that, and on exploring an artistic freedom, a theatricality, incorporating other elements, other disciplines that aren't dance-based. And like you say, I think with every work and with every reprise, which was what we were talking about earlier, there's an opportunity to dive back in and re-question things, and these are pertinent questions. You know, how much space is this element taking in this work for a viewer? Is that what we want? To reevaluate. And so these are again some of the questions that we're asking ourselves now. I think one thing I'm very excited about with this new re-edit in Mixed Company is to present something where the movement itself is more integrated into the fabric of the work. And then to answer your question, I think the way that we deal with this idea of the trend is to not be too concerned with it. To, like we were talking again earlier about people like Victor and Helen, to follow our own our artistic path that we've set out for ourselves, which isn't necessarily theirs. Not to say that what they're working on is a trend by any means, but to just stay focused to what we want to explore and to what we want to express.
It's not really a thought that ever crossed my mind that it would be a trend. To me, it's language, and I feel pretty authentic in what I have to say with that language. It feels like it's a part of me, and it's my vocabulary, and that vocabulary is developing, and Genevieve and I are not interested either in defining our mandate as bringing these two worlds together. I think it just happens out of our history and our experience together. So I hope that is what is being communicated through our work, is the message behind it, and what we have to say, in this case, about time and relationships. Yeah.
To sort of continue on what Tim was asking about, I think one of the biggest issues or one of the biggest difficulties for artists who come from a background such as yourselves is presenters' attitudes and the need quite often for classification that they're going to have. And in a way, you can almost see it in this double program with you two, because there are strong elements tying you together, even though there's quite a bit of dissonance also in the two pieces. Mm-hmm. Thematically, it's quite different. But the fact is that, and Tangente is quite often very open when it comes to classification, unlike some others. Do you feel that this is something you've seen applying to other festivals, to other presenters? The fact that they need to tag things as a certain way, and do you feel, if so, do you feel that this is something that can be limiting? Would you rather just let the work speak for itself rather than have labels imposed?
I think every artist wants their work to speak for itself, and I don't think any artist really wants to be categorized that much, and I think that applies to visual arts, music, you name it. I also think it's the artist's responsibility to keep that at arm's length. It's going to happen, and I think people need that. Different people are involved in the meeting between the artist and the audience, and audiences need to feel like they have a sense of what they're going to, and I think presenters need to also, in a sense, pair things in a certain way, and that's the art of presenting is the art of presenting. It's an art in and of itself, to see things and to see. It's like a DJ to see parallels between works that the artist might not see and might not agree with in some cases, but in a sense that's beside the point. I think the job of the presenter is to present a well articulated season, and in order to do that, they need to create themes. Or they can create themes. I think it's a very valid tool. So I don't have anything to say against that. I mean, I think that's part of what makes this thing special, is that artists should not think in terms of those terms. I think when you're making work, I don't think you should think in terms of how will this fit into a season or what theme can this be paired. Don't be a presenter when you're being an artist. Make your work and stay true to it, like Emily was saying. Stay true to what your voice and what you have to say. I think the presenter comes in and sees parallels and tries to do the best that they can with pairing works together. I think Tangente's done a great job by pairing our two works together, because I don't think they should always be the same thing. I think there should be elements that are similar, and like you said, JD, a bit of dissonance helps, so that neither piece overshadows the other. They're two different propositions. And then for an audience member, it's great because you don't go in clueless. You go in with a sense of, okay, I'm seeing this. These are the themes that are drawing these two pieces together. Let's see what that is, and then they can, make their own conclusions.
Yeah, and I think nothing locks an artist into any genre for life. It's up to the artist to break out of that if they want to. If I want to make a punk rock piece next time I go into the studio, I think I can own that and just trust presenters to deal. Yeah.
But I do think it's worth noting that, we've spoken a little bit about hip-hop today, but I do think it's important to note that regardless of the fact that both of our works have more or less of a presence of hip-hop in our work, that's not how Tangente has put us together. And I have to say that I appreciate that. I think I think it was Sean Katz who wrote a review on In Mixed Company last year who used the term substance and style. And I really like that Tangente took that and ran with that, because I do think that is a parallel between our works that I feel very comfortable with, is that we're young choreographers. We're both co-artistic director. There are two artistic directors and choreographers in each one. And we are both concerned, I think, with balancing substance and style. We're not artists who are only in substance or only in style. I think both of those elements are important to our work, and I think that's going to be that's going to be seen, and an audience will be able to register those parallels very clearly.
Well said.
Thank you.
One of the interesting things that is easy to miss, I feel, for this presentation of your show, is that it's in collaboration with Pop Montreal. And that's something that Tangente started doing a few years ago. And it, in a way, it helps bring in visibility from an audience that might not necessarily know about dance, go see dance. Is this something that you've discussed with the presenter, in this case Tangente? How it's going to be advertised to the Pop Montreal public? Also, how, why exactly they're doing that? Is this something that's been discussed with Tangente?
The collaboration itself was discussed, but I think the nature of the relationship falls more into their court. I think both companies have certain advertising mandates, and I think we all and Tangente meet on certain points, but I don't know that Pop Montreal is one of them. I know that, we all have our own contacts who we want to reach out to, and people and methods to get people to the show. And like I said, part of that quote unquote list overlaps with Tangente, and in the publicity of the show, we do collaborate with them. But the nature of the relationship with Pop Montreal stays between Tangente and Pop Montreal.
One thing that I'm excited about is that people with a Pop Montreal pass can come to the shows at Tangente for free next week. So if anyone has bought a pass, then they can come. Yeah. It's a really exciting collaboration that I think is in development, but it's a great idea to bring the music world into the dance world and create some more cross-pollination there. I think there's a lot we can share, and I look forward to discovering that festival a little more too. Yeah. I think it can bring a lot.
I just wanted to get into crowdsourced funding because Floor Rider and Tonik have a campaign currently.
Yes.
And another parallel between the companies, last season for the premiere of In Mixed Company, Parts and Labor Dance had one.
Yeah.
So how about we just hear a little bit about Floor Rider and Tonik's initiative and give you a little bit of time to speak about that.
Thank you, Tim. We're trying to raise $5,000 right now to pull off this reprise of this work. There aren't a lot of grants out there for this type of endeavor, presenting the same work at the same space. Especially, we're not touring. It's kind of hard maybe to justify, although I think it's totally pertinent, doing this piece again. And for us, it's a really important time because now that the creation is under our belts, we can focus on things like inviting presenters this time and getting our work out there in the world. So we need more money and able to pay our dancers properly and also afford some photography for the work. Our photography from last year we just did during the dress rehearsal, and the lighting is quite dim and it wasn't satisfactory, our industry standards. So we've launched a crowdsource funding campaign with CapiPal. If you can check that out online and give us a little donation, it would be so appreciated. /encore, density of a moment /encore.
Can you speak to your experience with the crowdsource funding campaign last year and how it helped your company move forward?
Yeah. We were very lucky to reach our goal last year. And like Emily's saying now, it's a really important coup de pouce that can help you get to where you need to get to with these kinds of opportunities, which fit a little outside of the box in terms of granting bodies. Emily's absolutely right that there's not a whole lot out there. I'm also of the belief that it's important when you're working in the art sector to not rely 100% on public funding. So I do think that it's an important practice, and that's really what it is. It's a practice to get out there and ask for money and pitch your ideas, and whether it's with like Indiegogo or CapiPal, or whether it's going and finding small businesses who might in some way, again, like with the programmer mentality, draw parallels into your creative work or your mandate or just who you are, your identity. I think that's very healthy. We're working not only as artists but as entrepreneurs as well, and a lot of us young companies are being given these kinds of opportunities where we can get our work out there to a larger audience, but we don't necessarily have regular funding coming in. So I think that it's really fantastic that people are able to contribute to that, to all of these hidden costs that aren't necessarily visible, like Emily was saying, from photographers to rehearsal direction to just going back and remounting a work. It takes time, it takes work, and people work really hard for those things, and oftentimes it's also people who aren't necessarily on stage who are needing those resources to help support the work. And I think that one thing that's important to keep in mind is that it's not always, you see these things on Facebook and whatnot, like, oh, my campaign, et cetera, et cetera. You don't need $100. You don't need to give $100. You don't need to give $250. If I can speak from our own experience, it was the multitude of small donations that really made this huge impact at the end of the day. That if you've got $10, if you've got $20 to send a young company to give them a hand, if enough people do that, the goal is met, and you don't need to be scared off, I think, by these things by thinking, well, I'm not going to give $10. They're going to think that, I don't really support them. No, those things are really, really appreciated. So if you see Emily and Genevieve's campaign out there, definitely don't hesitate, even if, it's only a little bit. I think if enough people give a little bit, then for the person on the other end of it, it really does add up. And it's a really great net of support that's out there.
Another parallel between the two of you, your two companies, is the lighting, which I feel is very important to mention because both of you got to work with Paul Chambers, who has a very strong signature and is someone who has very much a vision, but is also, like, from my personal appreciation of what he's done, he's always able to work in tandem with choreographers so that his personal signature doesn't overwhelm the work, but rather really shines a spotlight on the qualities of the work. How was working with Paul Chambers for your pieces? How was your experience? And how do you feel that you managed together to bring lighting to become an important part of the process, of the creation of the final product?
I found working with Paul is so light. It's amazing. You tell him a little bit about your project, and he goes home with that, and he thinks about it, and he gets into your head, and he comes back with a proposition that is very expressive. It's very much his, but is exactly that, getting into your choreographic work and supporting it and shining light on it. He came up with a lot of ideas that were just making our creation move forward as we were in the creative process. He came up with ideas really early in the process that allowed us to move forward. In our piece, we're working with a lot of columns of light on stage because Genevieve and I had talked about isolating body parts, and he came to us with this idea of a forest of light. And from that idea, that was really early in the creative process, it became an important anchor point for the aesthetic of the piece and a lot of the meaning of the piece. So his participation was integral to what the piece became.
Working with us, what he brought to Mixed Company, I felt was the presence that the light held in the work was a little more subtle. It slightly less defined, I guess, than in Emily and Genevieve's work, where it's really it's quite defined. So I think in our working relationship, he brought an idea that was a bit more of a support to the work than something that acts as an element itself of it, which I think is an interesting thing to take into consideration. That he's also someone who knows when to really bring a very defined presence to the light and when to let the light act as more of a supporting role. In our context with Paul, he was also working as a set designer. So he was also balancing two roles. And I think the set, if anything, was the one that acted more as a defining factor. I have to agree with Emily that one thing that makes working with Paul a pleasure is he's the kind of artist, again, coming back to this idea of drawing parallels, who will draw parallels between things that you won't necessarily see. So as a collaborator, that's always something you look for. We'll speak to Paul a bit about what we're looking for and what the world is essentially that we're trying to set our work in. And then he'll go back and he comes back not only with the proposition, but with really interesting sources to support it, whether it's images, whether it's movies and film and music, concerts. He's the kind of guy who really does think outside the box and is true to that term. And will find sources that he can then reappropriate and transform and bring something new with those things. And like you said, working with him is always very light. It's always very engaging. He's someone who really, I think, takes it seriously and has as much fun as possible, which is very important.
And not easy.
And not easy. It's true. And I think that he's done a great job. Hopefully, this also is going to be a great night for him to show two works side by side. Two works that I believe he's quite proud of, and that I think he really went all out on. I think he really did a fantastic job on both pieces, and they show also for him a great versatility in him as an artist, what he can bring.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. So, Emily Honegger, David Albert-Toth, thank you so much for coming to talk to us today. Just to remind everyone, this will be Parts and Labor Dance presenting in Mixed Company, and Floor Rider and Tonik presenting Densité d'un moment. And that will be on September 18th, 19th, 20th, and 21st at Tangente in Montreal. Emily, if you wouldn't mind introducing what we'll be hearing right now.
This piece was composed for Densité d'un moment by Jacques Poulain-Denis and was also used in a flash mob last spring organized by Circuit Est.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you so much, both.
Thanks for having us.
Dirty Feet is recorded every week at the Montreal Improv Theatre. Check them out at montrealimprov.com.
Dirty Feet est produit et animé par
Produced and hosted by Allison Burns
JD Papillon
et Stéphanie Morin-Robert.
You can find out more about our show at nomoreradio.com, follow us on Twitter at Dirty Dirty Feet, and find us on Facebook at Dirty Feet Podcast.
Vous pouvez écouter tous nos épisodes sur notre site web ou vous pouvez vous abonner également sur iTunes à notre podcast.
Listen to past episodes on website or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes.
While you're there, be sure to give us a rating and or leave a comment to help us spread the word.
Tune in next week for a whole new show.